Coyote. Fernando was 13 and his life was mostly spent in his village, but he wasn't alone. His partner in crime was his brother, Rafael. Together, they roamed their village, clever for the streets, yet devoid of any academic education. They were known for their notoriety and links to the cartel. Because of this, they would bully the other kids. Carjacking and stealing from gringos was a summer job. One time, Fernando had punched a driver whose car had broken down outside his hotel and stole his luggage. There were many such incidences, and their mother Selma was sick of them. She was a struggling single mom, doing her best to raise them and turn them into proper adults. Education is important, she once said to her mother. I have to do something or else they will end up like their father. What's your plan then? Asked her mother. Do you know Diego, the drunkard? Her mother raised her brow. No, I mean his brother Sanchez. He knows a lot of people, and he can get me fixed up with a job in the States. He still comes round to the bars here sometimes in the evenings. My friend was telling me he knows a gringo named Max. He's a coyote. A what? Coyote, mother, not an animal. A man who smuggles people from here to the US. I have to ask Sanchez for this opportunity to work there. But all of a sudden, why are you leaving Mexico? Selma walked over to the kitchen table. There was a box. Opening it, she took out a letter and then turned towards her mother. Do you know what this letter is? She explained to her that she had received a letter from her ex-husband, Felix. He was the kind of guy who ever since his childhood was involved with the cartel. Killing someone, he knew it from an early age. As he grew up, he also got to know many tunnels, and they were used to smuggle drugs. He rarely had time for his wife. All of his attention was always on the business, as he worked for the biggest cartel in Mexico's history. But one day, he was convicted for his wrongdoings. To pay the price, he was sent to jail for many years. Felix hadn't seen his kids for a long time. Now, the letter that his ex-wife was holding said that he was going to be released within 6 months. Another request was that he wanted to meet his kids. If Fernando and Rafael meet him, they would end up just like him. He will drag them into crime, spoke Selma. Selma had told her mother that she would migrate to the US and find a job. Once she was settled, she would bring her children to the land of opportunities. Yet to get there, she had to look for Sanchez. The next week, he had arrived to a local bar. Selma's friend from the village had made arrangements for her. When she went over, Sanchez wasn't alone. Beside him was sitting a very big man who almost had a blonde beard and short hair. Sanchez, on the other hand, looked quite small, but he had a friendly smile. He asked Selma how she was doing and if she was serious to take the chance. You know that crossing the border is extremely hard, right? He spoke. The point is, Max interrupted, holding his vodka shot. If you get killed, we are not responsible. Be ready tomorrow. With you, there will be another 3 people, and bring the cash. Max wasn't from Mexico. He was from Texas. Yet, he had lived most of his life in Mexico. The locals thought he was a hero, helping people, but in reality, he was only serving his own depraved instincts. He referred to the locals as cockroaches, and he was interested in money only. He could be nice enough, but he could switch his temperament. It wasn't stable, especially when he was drinking. Selma was thinking about his demeanor. He was a rough-looking cowboy, but she didn't care. Just get me to the US, she was saying in her mind, and she prayed. Later, she was busy packing her small bag because that was the requirement. She was a little scared. This was the first and last time she would be leaving the country. So, as the darkness of night set in, she kissed her parents goodbye and farewell to her boys who were sleeping. She was alone, but she had no other choice, so off she walked to the rendezvous. It was so desolate in the night, the insects were buzzing, and in the distance, Selma could hear wild wolves howling. It was a random place to meet, the crossroads. It was a long way outside of Selma's village. Sanchez had promised her that he would drop Selma at the meeting point, an old truck stop Later, they had arrived, but no one was there, until out of nowhere, a minivan showed up. The van was driven by Max, and had a few hidden trunks that could position 4 people. The Coyote had informed Selma that one of the trunks was empty, and that she had to hide there until the border crossing was done. The trunks were thin and made of iron. It was desperation that made her willingly get inside. The van started to move, and Selma lay there thinking, if she died, she was already in a coffin of sorts. It was uncomfortable and bumpy. Very soon the situation took a turn for the worst. One of the men had urinated on himself, out of pure fear. Very soon the smell had spread all over the van, and this is when Max began to lose his mind. "You idiot," snapped Max. "There is no time for this. Can't you control yourself?" Max had thought that the smell would go away eventually, but it didn't. It lingered. If the border police stopped them now, they would surely be caught. Max was losing control. His temper was boiling, but he took a deep breath and tried to calm his nerves. He didn't care about the passengers, as he had already been paid. He was just thinking about himself, and he really didn't want to go back to prison. But when another bump came in the old dirt road, the same man began to cry. His head had banged hard against the metal box. "Sit properly and stop crying," screamed the Coyote. "We are still far away from the border. You don't have to shout at us, Before the man could complete his sentence, Max had slammed on the brakes. Next to his seat there was a baseball bat. Picking it up, he opened up the back of the van. Lifting up the iron lid, he began to hit the 2 men, smashing his bat in their faces. Blood, bones and brains splattered all over the van's interior. Howling and screaming, Selma was freaking out as she tried to get out, but the Coyote got hold of her. "Where do you think you're going?" spoke Max. "I'm not finished with you." He pushed her up close to the van and started rubbing her thigh. He was trying to unbutton her jeans. Selma was in shock and was telling him to stop, but the Coyote was not listening. At that moment, the other female passenger, Marielle, began to climb out. She glanced at the 2 men who were certainly dead, smashed to a pulp by the psycho Max. Selma's voice returned and she started to scream so loud it echoed around the valley. Marielle could see Max and what he was about to do. Enraged, she jumped on his back and bit his neck hard. Ripping out a chunk of flesh, she spat it on the desert floor. Max leaned forward and Selma launched a kick between his legs. The Coyote was strong, but he was surprised and in pain. He fell back, clasping his wounded neck. Holding each other, both of the ladies ran and held hands, so as to not get separated in the darkness. This was a barren land, the place between borders. There was no one to help them now. This was life and death, and only if they will remain strong would they both survive. Desperately running for miles, they could see nothing ahead, and all they could feel was the cold. Hours later, when they thought they were safe, a noise made them jump. Scared, the ladies started running in panic. That's when Marielle's leg got stuck inside a small hole. When she fell, her leg twisted, and that's when she cracked her head on some rocks. Selma had turned around to see her blood spraying all over the rocks. She wanted to scream out, but immediately put her hands to cover her mouth. The whole night she wandered like a wild animal, and finally stumbled upon a small tree. She was completely drained and decided to rest there. When her eyes opened, it was getting light. She could hear the sound of running water. She was close to the border, and just maybe the nightmare was almost over. A few meters away, she spotted a fence, and on the other side was the land of freedom, someone thought. But beyond the fence was a river that lay almost 200 meters ahead of her, dividing the 2 countries. She wasn't a great swimmer, but Selma had to keep going. She found some old bottles and tied them together to help her float. "I'm doing it for Fernando and Raphael," she said, before she dived into the river. The current was not so strong, and it was with some luck that she was able to cross to the other side. When she stood on the bank, feeling almost dead, Selma smiled. She was in the United States, and she was safe. As she looked at the sign in her front, US Border Patrol, that's when she dropped to her knees. From the other side of the river, she noticed some trees moving. Then, as she turned back, a loud bang, and her brain splattered all over the sign she was reading just seconds before. She didn't have time to think or even know when a bullet had passed through her skull, putting her flat on her face. The bullet had come from the Mexican side of the border. Max smiled as he shouted insults at the dead woman in Spanish, for he had never any intention of letting her cross safely, and like many people before her, she was a victim of circumstance, and that of the worst in human nature. The end.